It's day 3 of the Cape 31 National Championships, hosted by the Royal Lymington Yacht Club. And until today, the weather didn't look like this. On day 1, this was the scene. And 3 days later, the fleet is still talking about it. Christchurch Bay was a spectacular setting for the 26-boat fleet, but it was tricky. While the wind instruments were reading 18 knots at the masthead, the breeze at sea level was considerably less, which, along with the shifts, provided plenty of opportunities to slide up and down the leaderboard. After 3 races, the boats at the top of the results were Tony Dickin's Jubilee with 2 wins and a 13th. Sandy Askew's Flying Jenny had also done well with a 5th, 2nd and 6th. Christchurch Bay seemed to suit them better than the more confined racecourse on Hillhead Plateau in round 1. Mike Bartholomew's Tokolosh was also up there after day 1. Didn't always start well, but always managed to muscle their way to the front. Day 2 was a slightly different affair. Sure, the breeze was in the same direction from the east, but it was a lot lighter and there was significantly more higher cloud cover damping down any thermal activity over the land. But nevertheless, for the start of racing on day 2, there was about 6 to 8 knots of breeze. After a tightly fought start and a tricky race, from there on in, it was Tony Dickin's Jubilee that won the first race of day 2.
A very different day from yesterday. Winds a lot lighter and up and down and very shifty. So we saw 20-degree shifts at least, and then I don't know, we were down at 6 knots and up at 14 knots. So it was a hard one to work through.
And how are you managing the traffic at your first few mark roundings?
You've just got to try and find a space. It's very crowded, very competitive. I mean, in that race particularly, everybody was around us all the time, and we just managed to nick out at the end and get the first position, which we're really pleased with.
Aside from the light breeze that had swapped directions and was now coming in from the south, the other thing that was notable in the second race was that the tide had built and was now heading to the east. And with such light breeze, the tide was becoming quite a big factor, which prompted the race officer to go for what he described as a walking course. In other words, the ability to be able to shift the windward and leeward marks to try and negate some of the effect of the tide. Anyway, on the first leg, the first upwind leg, it was quite clear to see what he was up against, because after a very short starboard tack, it was a long port all the way up to the top. This time it was James Howell's Geller that took the win, and as James Peters explained, the tide had been on their minds.
It's tricky. We've got a cross tide at the moment, so it's not as much as there is in the Solent, but we've still got about 1.5 knots of tide, which when we're only doing 4 or 5 knots of boat speed is quite a lot. So it's always keeping an eye on what the tide's doing, how it's affecting us, and how it's going to change next.
Day 2 might not have delivered the same champagne conditions as day 1, but with 2 more races in the bag, the fleet headed back to Lymington for the night, happy that the race management had squeezed the best out of some tricky conditions. But there was more change to come. Day 3 started with a long delay. No wind, plenty of rain and very poor visibility. But eventually racing did get underway. And first out of the traps on the first start was Tony Dickin in Jubilee. By the top mark, it was Flying Jenny that had led the fleet up the first beat. Fairly close on their heels, Tony Dickin in Jubilee. Meanwhile, further down at the back of the pack, there'd been chaos as boats had come in on the port tack lay, only to find that there was absolutely no way round the windward mark. By the bottom gate of what had been a very tricky downwind leg, Flying Jenny was still in the lead and had extended their lead. By now, the tide was running hard to the east, making the right-hand mark the favoured one to round. But it was a big call to pull it off if you came in on starboard. But Bertie Bickett's Fargo did it with ease. The second upwind leg saw a bit of a change though. Flying Jenny went slightly more to the left and Jubilee slightly to the right, as did Bertie Bickett on Fargo. And by the top mark, it was Jubilee that was leading, Fargo in second, and Flying Jenny rounding in third. But someone else who would have been absolutely delighted to be rounding in fourth was Barry Sampson in Short Echo. The last downwind leg got really tricky as the breeze started to die. But Jubilee held their nerve, picked the right route and took the win. Just behind them, Flying Jenny had managed to squeeze ahead of Fargo to get back up into second, while Shotgun squeezed themselves into third and Fargo fourth. Barry Sampson crossed the line in fifth.
Oh, it's a real race of snakes and ladders, that one. We were just trying to spot where the wind was more than anything else. There were some real holes. It was actually as bad coming back downwind second time round, and we were just keeping an eye out for where the wind was. We noticed that Flying Jenny just sailed into a bit of a hole and were able to take advantage of that.
As the breeze dropped at the end of the first race, it looked like that might be it for the day. There was little sign of any more breeze coming in. But as the clock counted down towards the last time at which a race could be started, the breeze picked up again, just enough to get another race underway. This was particularly nerve-wracking for Jubilee. Yes, they had a decent lead over second place, but in such light and tricky conditions, the risk of slipping down the fleet was one that could actually see them be knocked off the top of the leaderboard. Jubilee had good reason to be nervous about this race. Tokolosh was first round the windward mark. Jubilee was buried in the fleet. Flying Jenny, who'd gone into this race in third overall, were also well down the pack. Coming into the bottom gate, Tokolosh was still leading. To win the event overall, Jubilee needed to be ninth or better if Tokolosh won. By the top of the course for the second time, Tokolosh was still leading and had in fact extended their lead over the rest of the fleet. The scramble to get through the bottom gate had made it difficult to see exactly where Jubilee sat in the field. All we knew was that it was greater than ninth. The big question was whether they'd been able to pick up any places on the last beat. At the top mark it was tight. They were eighth. They couldn't afford to lose any more than one place maximum on the last downwind leg. And as Kumbu did a penalty turn, they'd moved up to seventh. While Tokolosh had won the final race, the championship title was going to be decided further back. They'd held their nerve. They'd started off deep in the fleet, but they'd come back to seventh, enough to win the Cape 31 National Championship. Tony Dickens, Jubilee. So after a nail-biting last race where two of the three front-runners were buried in the pack, the overall standings remain the same. Victory went to Tony Dickens' Jubilee. Mike Bartholomew's Tokolosh finished second and Flying Jenny in third. Over the course of the three-day event, the weather had been challenging, but despite the two races that didn't take place, there were very few, if any, complaints. Racing in Christchurch Bay had gone down well with the fleet, and they were still talking about Friday. Tony, well done. That was probably a bit nerve-wracking, was it, that last race?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's very nerve-wracking. Just to prove how tight this racing is. You know, Top Puller went out the bag in the last race and left us to try and finish within 8 points of them, I think it was. So, yeah, it was really close. Pleased to have done it.
I bet you are, because it didn't look good up that first beat, did it?
No, it was the wind actually started really quite light and then built through the race. So actually, it was a question of which side of the line you got, and we were really worried off the line. But actually, it came good for us, and we got in the top 8 or 9 at the top mark, so it wasn't too bad.
Now, it's been quite a tricky weekend, been a variety of conditions, and we've seen people at the front of the fleet, the back of the fleet, but you've been consistently at the front. What's your secret?
The quick answer to that, clean starts. If you can get a clean start and get away, then you're out of the fleet by the time you get to the top mark. And positions are won and lost at that top mark when everybody's trying to get round at the same time. So if you can be in front of them, it just makes a massive difference.
Simple as that. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dave, well done. A second, maybe not quite what you're after, but still, you must be pretty pleased.
Yeah, very pleased. Seemed to come second a lot, which is a bit annoying, but we did the whole of last year, bar one event. But I think, Dribbly sailed really well in this event, and we made just enough mistakes that we kind of weren't quite there, but at the same time we're really consistent, so it was good fun. It's good fun to get someone different too.
Next stop for round 3 sees the fleet head to Cows Week.